In this episode, will the real Sauron please stand up? 3 rings for the Elven kings, Numenor returns home, and Nori goes on an adventure. Hello, entertainment enthusiasts. This is Ray, and this is the Fandom Realm. It is time for another episode, and please remember to hit that subscribe button. As always, spoilers are included, so be warned. Also, this is the season finale, so it is going to be a little longer. This reaction is to the season finale, episode 8 of The Rings of Power. And this is definitely the episode we have all been waiting for to answer the question, will the real Sauron please stand up? And that is a question that is tackled in the very first moments of the episode when it appears the cult of Sauron meets with the stranger and identifies him as their Lord Sauron. The cultists kneel to the stranger, but he looks like he has no idea what is going on. This had to be a shock to a bunch of people out there, since everyone and their brother and sisters have fingered Halbrand as Sauron for at least the last few weeks. The cultists and the stranger do come into conflict, with the cultists getting the upper hand early on and trying to figure out why in the world he won't respond as Sauron. Finally, the Harfoots are going to intervene, and the Wanderer is going to end up losing her staff, which Nori picks up and gives to the stranger. Meanwhile, Galadriel rides to Eregion to take Halbrand to the elves. She is greeted by Elrond and Celebrimbor. While Halbrand is being cared for, Galadriel finds out about what has been going on with the elves and the Tree of Light. Halbrand is going to make a relatively quick recovery and is going to meet with Celebrimbor in the tower and suggests that they use an ore that might enhance the qualities of the mithril, considering that the big problem they have is they don't have enough mithril. Celebrimbor considers this a good idea, and Halbrand tells him to consider the idea a gift. That statement from Halbrand is supposed to make us recall the knowledge of Sauron giving the rings as a gift. Eventually, in a conversation with the High King Gil-galad, Celebrimbor reveals to the High King that he received the idea from Halbrand and uses the statement, not of the flesh, but over flesh. I think we heard Adar use that. I'm not 100% sure, but it makes Galadriel very suspicious, and she ends up requesting that one of the elves try to find some information for her on the leaders of the Southlands. After Halbrand suggests more information to Celebrimbor about splitting the ore up, he is confronted on the banks of the river by Galadriel, who demands to know who he really is, seeing that the rulers of the Southlands had been killed over 1,000 years before, and they had no heirs. Halbrand identifies himself, and as she attacks him, he goes into her mind and tells her basically his story, but he does that as her brother. Then they're going to be on the raft in the middle of the ocean, and he's trying to convince Galadriel to be his queen. We get an awesome visual of the figure of Sauron standing on the raft with his Dark Queen. Again, this appears to be another recall from Lord of the Rings when Galadriel refused the One Ring from Frodo. She called herself a Dark Queen. Galadriel threatens to kill him, and she is suddenly pushed in the ocean and is drowning. As it turns out, she never left Eregion, and she wakes up as she's being pulled out of the water by Elrond. Of course, once she's pulled from the water, we don't see Halbrand again in Eregion. Galadriel also does not come clean to Elrond about Halbrand's identity, although Elrond's going to figure this out later on when he finds the scroll that the elf had given early on that revealed basically Halbrand wasn't who he said he was. Now we get to find out the stranger's fate. As Nori handed him the staff that the Wanderer had been using, it is in this moment that the 3 cultists finally get the idea through their thick heads that the stranger is not indeed Sauron, but the other, which they call Istari. The stranger uses the power of the staff to destroy the cultists, and then the staff is destroyed. Basically, looking at this, we know the Astari are the wizards, so it's really pushing that this might be Gandalf. It is revealed that Sadoc Burrows, the presumed leader of the Harfoots, received a mortal wound. Sadoc is the trail finder or pathfinder, I'm not sure what they called him for the Harfoots, but he always seemed to be their leader. That's why I'm going to call him their presumed leader. Now, this is one of my small issues with the episode, because you're telling me that the stranger can heal those trees and bring all that life that he did earlier on in the series, but he can't heal Sadoc. That just doesn't make much sense to me. To wrap up the story of the stranger and the Harfoots, the stranger understands that he has to go to Ruin, and Nori is going to accompany him on the journey. There's a huge throwback to Lord of the Rings here to suggest that this stranger is Gandalf, because when they don't know which way to proceed, he says that they should follow their noses if they aren't sure. Gandalf actually uses a statement in the Mines of Moria in Lord of the Rings, so they're really wanting us to believe that this is Gandalf. But personally, I'm thinking maybe this is a situation where the stranger might be to Gandalf as Gandalf the Grey was to Gandalf the White. I hope you understand that analogy. Basically, I'm just saying it's an earlier version of the being that is Gandalf. While we were busy figuring out who Sauron was, the Numenorians returned home. It was revealed earlier in the episode that the king was near death. He thought Isildur's sister, I think that's who she was Miriel, and he opens the door to a hidden chamber where she discovers the Palantir. While on the ship returning home, Elendil recommits to Miriel and the upcoming battle against basically Mordor. As the ship returns home, we see all the Numenorian ships in the harbor with black sails, marking the death of the king. To be honest, I didn't really care about the storyline today. I think they should have just left it off until next season, especially since they left the fate of Isildur, who was left for dead, completely up in the air. Just to let you know, we also did not get any scenes with Theo, Bronwyn, Arondir, the Southlanders, or Adar. Now back to Eregion, where Celebrimbor at Galadriel's urging is forging 3 rings, because 1 will corrupt, 2 will divide, but 3 will provide balance. Celebrimbor agrees, but needs pure gold and silver from Valinor, and since her brother's dagger was made in Valinor, Galadriel hands it over. We get to see the forging process for the 3 elven rings, and in the end we get to see what they look like, presumably right before they are split between Galadriel, Gil-galad, and Círdan the Shipwright. Although since there have been changes, I wouldn't be surprised if the 3rd ring is given to Celebrimbor. I'm not 100% sure how this is going to work out, because if I remember the Tolkien lore, the rings, or at least Vilya, which was one of the rings that Gil-galad bore, it didn't go to the king until after Eregion was destroyed. With the story being that the rings are going to preserve the elves because of the death of the Tree of Light, I don't know if they're going to stay true to who the elven ring bearers were. As we get a final look at the elven rings, the shot transforms into the Eye of Sauron, who we see in human form as he walks towards Mount Doom in Mordor. I have to say, with all the suspense and build-up, I thought this episode was a little underwhelming. It isn't that I thought it was bad, but the reveal of Sauron was anticlimactic because everyone pretty much knew it was Halbrand for weeks. I mentioned most of the small issues I had throughout the review, but the one thing that really sticks out to me in the writing is how fast Galadriel seemed to get suspicious of Halbrand. She was with him all this time and hadn't figured anything out, but once they got to Eregion, she seemed to figure it out pretty quick. It seems like the writers didn't know how they really wanted the reveal to take place, so they just had it happen. There was some cheese in this episode, like Galadriel's line about swimming to Elrond. I did like the callbacks to the Lord of the Rings. It's also interesting how they worked all the little tidbits of information into the story to hint at Halbrand's true identity. In the end, though, I liked Halbrand, and I'm a little disappointed that he ended up being Sauron. I was also disappointed that they are going to keep us waiting on the Isildur storyline. One thing I'm wondering is the timing for this series, though. It just seems a little off. Could it be that this Elendil and Isildur are not the same mentioned in Lord of the Rings? Could they be their forebears? Monarchs tend to name their children after their ancestors. So could the Elendil we see in Rings of Power be the forebearer of Elendil, the king of men who was killed by Sauron? I don't know if that is likely, but it would explain why I feel like the timing of this entire series is off compared to what we're going to see in the Lord of the Rings time frame in the Third Age. Can the Tolkien loyalists out there sort of give me an idea? What's your opinion on this? Is this timing actually going to work out from what we know in the Silmarillion and the other works that we have from Tolkien? Now, to bring this review to an end, I have to give this episode of Rings of Power a grade of a B. The only way I think it could have earned an A would have been if the reveal hadn't been so anticlimactic. I really think it's good to put all these little Easter eggs in a series in order to let people try to figure things out. But when everybody has figured it out, that makes the ending a little anticlimactic. So maybe hide things a little better next time. Overall, I must say I've enjoyed the series, and I'm looking forward to next season. There have been some issues throughout the season that I think the writers need to learn from for Season 2 in order to make the series even stronger. We're just going to have to accept that this is not the Silmarillion. And although I still don't like how Galadriel or the elves have really been conceptualized in this series, I would have to still give the series a B. I hope everyone has enjoyed the reviews of Rings of Power. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave your comments below so we can have a discussion about Rings of Power. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time on the Fandom Realm.